Welcome to the Future of Education podcast with your host, Dr. Galen DeHay.
Let's face it, colleges and universities must be innovative and might have to start thinking differently if they're going to overcome the challenges facing post-secondary education. I'm Galen DeHay, president of Tri-County Technical College, and this is The Future of Education, a podcast where I discuss the issues and opportunities in higher education with some of the brightest minds running campuses today. Subscribe to The Future of Education on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen.
This podcast is brought to you by Tri-County Technical College, a public 2-year community college located in upstate South Carolina. The college's mission is to provide students with an exceptional and affordable learning experience that improves their quality of life. Tri-County also advances economic development in the region by preparing a highly skilled workforce. Also brought to you by the Higher Education Studio of McMillan Pasden Smith Architecture, a trusted college and university partner for master planning, architecture, and interior design services for academic, athletic, and student life facilities. We design environments that advance culture, create community, and enhance the campus experience.
Over the last few years, the United States has faced unprecedented workforce challenges. Now more than ever, community colleges are being asked to respond to business and industry needs, acting as the engines for workforce training. At the same time, regulators are asking colleges to prove that they are effective in helping people get jobs that provide family-sustaining wages. Today, we're going to talk about the complicated topic of community college success. With us today is Dr. Laura Ullrich. Laura is a senior regional economist at the Charlotte branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Prior to joining the Richmond Fed, she served as Associate Dean for undergraduate programs and a professor of economics at Winthrop University. She holds bachelor's, master's, and doctorates in economics, and she's also served as a Fulbright scholar teaching economics in Kosovo. Laura's research interests include higher education, the economic impact of local development. She is a member of the Aspen Institute's Global Leadership Network via the South Carolina Liberty Fellowship, and she's also active in her community, serving on the executive committee of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Welcome, Laura, to our podcast today.
So happy to be here. Really good to get to talk to you today.
So, Laura, you've had some diverse experiences in the workforce, first in higher education and now at the Federal Reserve Bank. Tell us what brought you to this work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a great career as an academic economist, really enjoyed my time in higher ed. Never thought I would leave, actually. My personal research as an economist was mostly started out in K through 12. That's what I wrote my dissertation in. But as I worked as a professor and a college administrator, I got more interested in higher education. And so when I saw the job open up at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond to go be the economist for North and South Carolina and get to do external work with external constituents, but also to research the topics I find most important in the workforce, I kind of jumped on it. And it's really funny, Galen, I was thinking about today, you were one of the first people I met with when I took my role back in 2019. It was before you were president at Tri-County Tech. And I was thinking this morning, like, oh, what a road it's been for both of us. You know, I mean, things have really changed over the last 4 years. But it's been really a privilege for me to get out and about in our district to learn more about economics of all sorts, but especially paying attention to workforce and education.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, Laura, and really learning about what the Federal Reserve does. Many people know the Federal Reserve sets monetary policy, of course. We're hearing a lot about the Fed's role in regulating interest rates over the past year or so, but there's a area of the Federal Reserve that I want to talk a little bit more about, and that is the Federal Reserve's role in workforce. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So you're exactly right. Most people know the Federal Reserve for our work on inflation and interest rates, especially right now. But we actually have a dual mandate from Congress. And one side of that dual mandate is exactly that, to keep inflation at relatively low levels and to have interest rates that are reflective of that. But our other mandate from Congress is to work towards maximum employment. And while we have an exact target for inflation, so our target rate's 2%, everybody's probably heard that. On maximum employment, we really don't have a target, but what we're trying to do is try to figure out how to get people not only into jobs, but into jobs that use their skills and energy best. And so most of the work that I'm doing is actually in that maximum workforce category.
So tell us a little bit about the projects you're engaged in related to workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I reached out to you in 2019 was because our president was trying to identify how to measure community college outcomes, because he had pulled graduation rates from IPEDS, which, if people don't know, that's the Department of Education's database on outcomes. And I said, hey, I don't really know why, but I know from my prior research not to use those for community colleges. Like, they don't do a great job measuring. And so President Barkin said, okay, well, then what do I use? And I was like, well, that's a great question. So I embarked on this path to try to figure out what was the best way to measure student outcomes. So I talked to you along with lots of other leaders of community colleges across the 5 states that we represent, and then decided that there was no good way, really, that was consistent across states. Some states have their own measures. Some institutions have their own measures, but there wasn't a consistent metric. So we decided to create our own. So we have a survey director. We're a large research institution. We have survey experts. We have economists like myself and others who can do this work. And so we decided to jump into it ourselves.
So since you've started this work on figuring out how to measure success, I know that we've all realized how complicated that question is. So why is measuring success in community colleges important to the Fed Reserve? Right.
So if we look, so economists are interested in how people make decisions, right? And people, institutions, firms. And one of the ways people make decisions is by consuming data and then making a decision based on that data. And IPEDS does an especially poor job, and really a lot of other metrics that are out there do an especially poor job measuring community colleges because they use the same metric for 4-year schools and 2-year schools. So if we think about students in the state of South Carolina, everybody who enters the door at Wofford University, private 4-year school in Spartanburg, South Carolina this fall, is there to get a bachelor's degree. That's the point of going to Wofford University. That is everyone that enters goal. So if you look at their graduation rates, there's still some measurement issues, but it does a decent job measuring it for them. Almost everybody that walks in a place like Clemson University is there to get a bachelor's degree. That's their goal. But for community college, it can be very different, right? So some people are there to get an associate's degree. Other people just want to take a few classes to be able to transfer to a place like Clemson or Wofford. Others might be there just to take 2 or 3 classes to get a skill that they know will help them in the workforce. And the current measurements that are out there just don't do a good job measuring that. And so what I became concerned about was that the available data was causing people to make decisions in ways that they might make different decisions if the data were good, right? And I know we can't fix all the data problems at the Federal Reserve, we Bank of Richmond, we can't fix them all, but we did decide that we could provide an additional metric. We could create our own success metric that would give schools and community college systems a different way to define what they're doing and to publicize that so that when students or parents or guidance counselors or businesses are looking at, what are the outcomes at these technical and community colleges, they see our data as well.
So I know that you have just completed a pilot project with a number of community colleges across all of the states that the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank serves. So let's talk a little bit about that pilot. What were some of the approaches that were used for this pilot?
Yeah, so we did a pilot with 10 schools across the 5 states, which Tri-County Tech was a part of. And we met with the presidents of all those institutions, and we spent a lot of the time with the people that work in IR, institutional research at each of those institutions. Those folks helped us understand what data they had available and the ways in which they thought current data methods kind of underreported what they were doing. So out of that, we built our survey, did the pilot last year, got a lot of positive attention. So we are right now in an extended pilot. And we invited all the system offices across the 5 states to participate. And I am so excited to tell you that 4 of the 5 states have participated already. So we now have data for every technical and community college in South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, and we're getting Maryland in just a few weeks. We're still working on North Carolina, but we're getting data from all the community colleges in the district, which is so exciting. I mean, we started this from the very bottom, and really working with the 10 pilot schools has been invaluable because we've listened to them, listened to the challenges they've had, and I think built something of real quality around that.
So you alluded to this a little earlier, but I want to dig into this a little bit more. There, of course, are a number of other groups that are doing some similar work. Of course, the federal government has IPEDS, and we know that the American Association of Community Colleges has the Voluntary Framework of Accountability, and National Student Clearinghouse has metrics. So from your perspective, what's different about the work that the Richmond Federal Reserve is doing?
I think and this is kind of how I've sold it to all the systems too. The Federal Reserve, or most people may not know this actually, but we can't grant money to anybody. We can't charge anybody anything for participation. So there is no financial incentive on either side of this for people to participate or for us to get people to participate. That's a huge part of this, is that some of the other efforts have been kind of pay to play. And then if you want the data, you might have to pay a little more, all these things. So that's one thing. And we really, we don't have a direct dog in the fight in sense of we don't evaluate community colleges. We're not, we don't give them money. We don't grade them in other ways, things like that. The other thing is that the Federal Reserve, by definition, is forced to be nonpartisan and apolitical. People know that, and that's been a real positive here too, because of course, things like this do get political. Certainly the funding of community colleges, that discussion gets very political within states. And so we aren't going to be a part of that political discussion. We're going to just talk about the data. And I think schools have really appreciated that. And then the last thing I would say is we are a large research institution. We have some of the best researchers in the world, I would say, but there are very high quality researchers. And so there's a trust factor there too. I think some of the metrics that exist, if they are internal to the technical or community college system, or even from something like the American Association of Community Colleges, it might seem a little self-serving to say, hey, the federal government data, we don't want you to use that. We wanted you to use our data instead. But when it comes from the Federal Reserve, people know we're independent. And so I think it carries a little more weight for that reason.
Yeah, I would agree that the notion of an independent third party, the trust that the Fed Reserve has, as well as the building the new metric from the ground up from the individuals that actually do the work and the measurements are critical to making something like this work. Mm-hmm. So I know that the pilot is now complete. Tell us a little bit about what the Fed Reserve and the colleges have learned as a result of doing this work.
Yeah, I think one of the things we learned from the smaller pilot is that the success metric that we were calculating, we feel very confident that this does a better job of measuring actual success at community colleges. So I'll describe it really briefly. IPEDS looks at graduation rate for a very narrow cohort of students, just first-time, full-time students. Our cohort is broadened to be first-time students and non-first-time students to the institution, as well as full-time and part-time students. Honestly, as an economist, I don't care how many hours a student's taking, how many times they've been in college. I just want to measure their outcome, right? I mean, that's my viewpoint as an economist in the field. So we have a broader cohort, and within that cohort, we have 4 definitions of success. The first is graduation from whatever program they're enrolled in, and the credits on the credit side. So that could be an associate's degree or certificate program. Our second one, though, is the attainment of any credential or licensure on the way to that degree. So, for example, if somebody enrolls in associate's degree in automotive technology right now, and on the way to that associate's degree, they get a really valuable credential, so a certificate in diesel engines. Oftentimes, that student might leave after they get that credential because they can go get the job they wanted to get now that they have that diesel engine certificate. Right now, in the IPEDS measurement, that person is counted as a failure. In our metric, they're counted as a success. And then the fourth category is one I felt really passionately about, which is persistence over 4 years. So our window of time is a 4-year window of time. And if somebody has remained enrolled and in good standing with a good GPA, then we count them as a success. So most of the people that are in this bucket tend to be single moms, young kids taking one class at a time. And I know, Galen, as an educator, and for myself as an educator, we know these students, right? We've worked with them. They're the ones that we tear up with at graduation because we've seen how hard they work. And so from like a philosophical standpoint, it really bothered me that they were not counted as a success. So we did see our metric is much higher. The other thing we learned is that we needed more data on high school students, which is a part of this too. We're collecting separate data on high school students, and high school students are wildly successful in attaining college credits. So we're going to be able to talk about that in a different way than before. And then the last thing I'll say is we also collect some data on wraparound services. This is the easiest part of our survey because it's just like checkbox. Do you have a childcare center? Do you have a food pantry? Do you have, yada, yada, yada. But those data aren't collected right now. And we've gotten a ton of interest in that from funders and foundations, grantors that are saying like, we want to provide money for more of these things, but we have no data to measure whether or not this is effective. And so it's interesting. Just this morning, I had a conversation with a very large foundation, and that was the part they're most excited about. So we learned a lot from that initial pilot experience. And we also learned that we wanted to expand it, that we were headed down the right path.
Yeah, I think that the sum of a good bit of what we learned as a participant in the pilot is just how complex that one word success really is. And it goes down to the individual level. You'd alluded to this a little earlier, that the kind of the national standard of IPEDS really uses one measure, and that is, did you graduate within a certain period of time? But we know in community colleges, our students are extremely diverse, and they've got so many different goals, and finding new ways to measure whether they are reaching those goals is ultra important as we try to demonstrate the value of higher education.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll tell you, Galen, we haven't released any of our extended pilot results yet, but I'll give you a little teaser. We'll release them publicly, probably around November of this year. But the differences are stark at some schools. So in the data that we're seeing, there's schools that their IPEDS graduation rate is 20 to 25%, but their success rate in our metric is in the 70%. It's a huge gap. This is not a small gap. There are a lot of students that are getting another type of credential other than a degree, or are transferring to schools where it's not being picked up in the data currently. And so we're really excited about what we're seeing.
I know that some of your colleagues presented recently at the Community Colleges of Appalachia regional meeting, and there was a really interesting topic that was discussed, and that was, what does a number mean? So one of the presenters pushed a number up on the screen, and it was just a number, and it happened to be a graduation number or a retention number, one of the two. And it made me think about one of those numbers that community colleges are often graded against, and that is retention. You mentioned that, hey, a student might earn a employable credential that might not be an associate's degree, and they were successful in moving into the workforce, but that doesn't count as success. I think about that at our college. Retention as an example. We've got a program called Bridge to Clemson, and those students spend 1 year with us, and then by its structure, they transfer to Clemson University, and they graduate at basically the same rate as a Clemson student does. But it looks bad at Tri-County for retention. So really delving into what these numbers mean for community colleges and what success really looks like is so important. So I know our institution is grateful that the Federal Reserve has taken an independent look at this.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I mean, we talk about workforce so much, right? I mean, you turn on the news every day, there's stories about we need more skilled trades, we need more workers. Where are all the workers? Well, what I'm interested in as a researcher and as an economist is the pipeline from K through 12 to the workforce. And when I think about these pipeline, there's a lot of exits along the way, right? Some people exit right out of high school and go into the workforce. Some want a short-term credential and go in the workforce. Some want to go to school longer. But there's also holes in the bottom of this pipeline, and people are leaking out, right? They're leaking out. They're not making it all the way through. And there are ways we can make that pipeline leak less. And data is not going to fix everything, right? But I do think that collecting data that better describes what these schools are doing is important, because even if you know that about Tri-County Tech, right? Like, that you're leading that organization, so you can look at your retention rate and say, well, this doesn't really accurately reflect anything because of the Clemson Bridge program and because of other credential issues. But if somebody Googles the stats for Tri-County Tech, that's what they see, right? They see the IPEDS graduation rate and they see that retention rate. And so people are making decisions based on that, right? Like high school guidance counselors are making decisions on what they recommend to students based on what they see. And so I do think providing data that maybe tells a little different story is important. And I'm not shy about sharing that my lifelong goal is to change the way the federal government measures community colleges. They shouldn't use the same retention rate. I'm not shy about that, but baby steps. But that certainly is a long-term goal for me, because I do think it's important to. There's probably no way to do it perfect, but we could do a better job.
I agree. I had a colleague share with me a number of years ago a phrase that has stuck with me, and that is that data tells and stories sell. So when you think about how community colleges might use these data to tell their stories about success, what kind of advice might you give?
That's a great question. I think the advice that I would give is that so the way we're going to present our success metric is we'll have that headline number, but then we're going to break it down into those categories. And so I think if you're trying to sell, depends on who you're trying to sell to. If you're trying to sell to students to say, hey, you can do this in whatever way you need to do it. If you want to get a short-term credential, go do that. If you want to get an associate's degree, we love that. Look at how many people are transferring. You can go to a four-year school. But also, if you're that person that just wants to take one class at a time because you have a full-time job and 3 kids, we're counting you as a success too. And look, we're seeing, Galen, about 10% of students fall into that category. Wow. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of people. And so right now, sometimes I think institutions have the incentive to try to get that graduation rate up, right? So at some level, they're trying to kind of push students into that box. Students are trying to push themselves into that box, but maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe there are other things. I also think these data are going to really help community colleges talk to their local legislators in a different way, to say, hey, let me put this in front of you and show you we're actually serving students at a rate that is at or above the four-year colleges in terms of a percentage of success.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of state legislators that are providing a good bit of funding because of the workforce mission of community colleges across our region and really across the United States, and they expect to understand the return on investment for that. And
right.
This kind of measure could certainly help community college leaders tell that story.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you one other example, one other tidbit too. So we are also collecting data on the non-credit side of the house, which is not in IPEDS at all. And IPEDS was going to start collecting it in 2025. And then they came out and said, no, we're not going to. It's basically too messy. We honestly did not expect to get non-credit data from all the states, but we are getting it. So here's another just small, interesting tidbit. A lot of people have probably read about male enrollment falling at institutions of higher education. That's true on the credit side, and it's true at four-year schools. But what we're seeing in our data is that the non-credit programs are actually heavily male-dominated, and the completion rates are higher for males on the non-credit side. But the interesting thing about that is that non-credit programs in general are funded at lower levels than credit programs. So it may be that we are underfunding programs that actually are attractive to male students. That would be important to know. That would be important to know.
In particular, since their completions are higher and they're moving into the workforce, but they're uncounted right now.
Correct. So there's stories like that too that I think for me are helping to kind of like help me visualize the narrative of what might be going on a little differently, but I think could also be very important for conversations with legislators, also for Department of Commerce. They're interested in that sort of stuff too. So we are really excited about, like I said, not fixing the data, but just providing a different look.
Yeah. So where do you see this work going next?
So in a perfect world, I get all 5 states this year to participate. North Carolina, they have a new president, so I'm really working on that. But if not, we're going to have 4 or 5 out of 5 states this year. November, we're going to go live with this. Early November, I think, is when we'll go live with all of our results. Right now, we are building an internal database system that we hope will allow us to move out of the pilot next year and have every community college and technical college in our district participate, submit their data online, and then allow us to post it online so that other people can use it for research or for whatever, right? Legislators can use it, schools can use it. So we're hoping to make this a permanent survey within the Richmond Fed. Not surprisingly, probably, we're also getting some interest from schools outside of our district. There is a history of projects like this being expanded. I was actually thinking the other day, really, if a school in Kentucky or Georgia or Pennsylvania wanted to participate, it wouldn't be that much for them to just submit that. They could participate as individual schools if they wanted to. So I think we'll be open to that at some point. I'm hoping we can make this a permanent fixture of what the Richmond Feds does. I feel like this is a space, given our workforce mandate. If we really want to work towards maximum employment, we have to figure out how to give people the skills they need and give companies the workers they need in a way that works for both institutions and the individuals.
Yeah, I agree.
And so to me, the community college space is a perfect place for the Federal Reserve to be. And our president agrees, so that's good. And so I'm hoping that the Richmond Fed can be a leader, not just in the Federal Reserve System, but also be a leader where when other research organizations are looking at community colleges or higher education, they call us.
So one frontier, to throw in an extra little piece for you to consider as we're thinking about what comes next, is for students and then also for the communities that the colleges serve. Students are often interested in a measure of success of what am I getting out of this? How much money am I making? So this notion of, is this credential leading to a family sustaining wage? Has your organization thought about, or have you seen anything out there related to measuring success after graduation with these post-graduation wage outcomes of proving again this return on investment for spending time to earn these credentials?
This is an excellent question. We have looked at this. We thought about this. We get asked about it a lot, including by our own president. The quality of data that exists on post-graduation outcomes differs significantly by state. In some states, they have pretty good data on this. In some states, they only know where the person works, not what job they're in. So, for example, if somebody goes and gets a credential in phlebotomy and they work at a hospital, you just have to assume they're a phlebotomist at the hospital, which may or may not be a great assumption, right? So the data quality are an issue. However, those data exist. They're somewhere, right? They're in a database at the Department of Commerce or Department of Employment and Workforce or somewhere, right? So some of this is about sharing across agencies. I think as we build our expertise and reputation in this space, this is a role we can play too, as kind of a convener to encourage groups to share adequate information. And if we can get that data, we would love to play a part there. But I think that's one of the things the Fed does really well, is kind of convene and have hard discussions and things like that. So I think this is definitely a place we should be involved as well.
Now, that would be an exciting next step for sure. As we close out our time together, I'd like to ask our guests a closing question. What's your advice to community college leaders as they create the future of education?
Great question. Wow. I've gotten to meet so many community college leaders. And I'll just say really quickly, one of the things that I have loved about this work is just the quality of individuals in the space. It's just people that are doing this for the right reason. These are mission-driven leaders that really want to improve the outcomes of their students and the employers in the area. It's just been a real joy to interact with folks in this space. I would say that what I see in the data, and you're seeing this in the enrollment declines overall in four-year college enrollment, is the way that individuals want to consume education is changing. And some of this was happening before COVID, and COVID accelerated it. And we're not going back where we were before. And instead of relying on what's always worked, I think institutions, if they want to be wildly successful, are going to have to think outside of the box. And having been an academic, I know this is hard for institutions of higher education. But I do think there are ways that schools can really meet students where they are and can develop amazing programs. And actually, the Clemson Bridge program, I mean, I've told you before, Galen, I think it's the best program in America. I mean, I really it's phenomenal. And that's a great example of something that was out of the box. When you guys put that together, that was different. And it's still different, really. But it has a phenomenal reputation. It's wildly successful. It has changed the reputation of your institution. It's changed the reputation of Clemson in a lot of ways. So, just trying to be innovative and meet students where they are, because I don't think we're going back. Forward looks different than it did before.
Absolutely. Laura, thank you for spending time talking about your work and the role that the Federal Reserve plays in workforce. This has been an outstanding discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
So measuring success in community colleges is clearly quite complicated. In our next podcast, we will be talking to Davis Jenkins, a researcher at the Community College Research Center at Columbia University, about the role dual enrollment plays in student success.
Thanks for joining us on the Future of Education. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. And please check out our other episodes.